Revenge with Karen.
I knew I was going to eat shit the second Trevor walked in holding a caramel macchiato and my pitch deck. My pitch deck. The one I'd pulled together over 6 months of 3 a.m. patch cycles, weekend bug hunts, and enough energy drinks to dissolve my kidneys. And there he was, CFO of Smiles and Optics, handing it off like a tray of canapes to Luke, his favorite LinkedIn influencer masquerading as a product lead. Sarah's been grinding. Luke polished the message, he said, smiling like we were all in on the joke. He's got the exec sparkle. That sparkle, turns out, was a blinding fog of buzzwords and a jawline sharp enough to make HR forget what credentials meant. Meanwhile, I was still using my personal laptop because procurement hadn't approved my new one. Fun fact, the screen was duct taped at the corner. You know, like our entire back end. Here's the setup no one saw. Our flagship platform, Lumina Core, wasn't just sputtering, it was dying. Like a possum with a cracked spine crawling behind the data center to die quietly. Only it didn't die because I kept it alive. Quietly. I rewrote the auth layer after we discovered a 2-year-old breach no one told legal about. I revamped the deployment pipeline after a rogue script triggered a midnight rollback that erased half of marketing's analytics. I even hand-coded a fallback payment module using my damn vacation time because the contracted devs ghosted. You'd think that would earn a seat at the grown-up table. Nope. In meetings, Trevor always introduced me as Sarah. She's our glue, like I was some sentient post-it keeping the furniture from wobbling. And Luke got introduced as a visionary. Me paint you a picture. Luke once suggested we rename our dashboard buttons to verbs that resonate with empowerment. He changed submit to own it. I wish I were kidding. This man thought a data migration was a social media campaign and tried to run a /B tests on error messages. He once helped QA by uploading a PDF that bricked the staging site and asked if the error was part of the user journey. When Trevor called an alignment sync one Monday and said, "We're going to let Luke take the lead on the relaunch pitch. You've already done the groundwork," I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I smiled, said of course. I even helped Luke convert the deck into one of those fancy animated slideshows he liked, complete with parallax transitions that made me motion sick. Because here's the truth. You better write this down in your little Moleskine journal of betrayal. The easiest way to burn a bridge is to let the other guy think he's building it. Oh, and before we go any deeper into this dumpster fire of corporate sabotage, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and throw a like on this. Apparently 95% of you are lurking like Luke in a team Slack you don't contribute to. It really keeps the team caffeinated and chaotic, which is how we like it. Anyway, back to the beautiful mess. While Luke was making slides that said things like synergize the luminescence, I was putting out real fires. Our client onboarding pipeline was crashing every time someone used Safari. Trevor didn't know, Luke didn't care. I stayed up until 4 a.m. rewriting half the JavaScript because the contracted devs thought a sync/await was optional. I didn't even tell anyone. I just shipped it. Quietly. It's what I did, that's what I was. Quiet, reliable, replaceable on paper. My desk was near the server room because someone thought tech leads like to be close to the hardware. Translation, I wasn't pretty enough for the glass-walled marketing floor. But in that dim corner, surrounded by humming metal and expired post-it notes, I had one thing no one else had, perspective. I saw the whole system. I saw where things frayed, and I started making notes. Quietly, you see. While everyone else was too busy chasing fake metrics, I was laying groundwork. Real groundwork, and I don't mean just patching code. I mean protocols, logs, traps, not the kind of traps that blow up in your face. The kind that sit there, inert, unnoticed, until someone steps on them. Trevor never asked how the production system got stable again. Luke never noticed the new compliance fields in the deployment forms. Nobody cared who moved the platform from barely usable to selling again. But they would, because I was done playing invisible, and the first spark was coming. All I had to do was wait. The rebranded pitch landed in my inbox at 10:43 p.m. on a Thursday. Subject line, polished version smiling face with smiling eyes. From Luke, naturally. No attachments, just a link to a Figma board titled Lumina Core V2, Ignite the Future. I clicked, nearly choked on my dollar store chamomile tea. First slide, a stock photo of 3 hands touching a glowing orb. Second slide, disrupting the disruption, a new era of Corelite empowerment. The original problem statement, carefully researched, client-tested, and backed by 6 months of analytics, was gone, replaced with a bulleted list that included neural synergy, omnichannel harmony, and my personal favorite, UI as philosophy. Hadn't just mangled the pitch. He'd buried it in glitter and then pissed on the grave. The kicker, at the very bottom of the deck under acknowledgments it read, Project repositioned and saved by Luke R., product visionary. That was the night I stopped eating carbs and started chewing on my rage instead. But here's the part that made me want to gouge my eyes out with a stylus. The new version wasn't just cosmetic. Luke had committed changes to prod. Yes, read that right? Mr. lets a /B test the 404-page had pushed code. Without review, without tagging me, without telling anyone. He somehow bypassed the deployment pipeline I'd personally reconstructed after the last contractor left us with a recursive loop that melted our usage logs. I didn't even know about it until I caught a malformed CSS class rendering our user dashboard as white text on a white background in production. I checked the logs, there it was. His commit message, color tweak trust me winking face. I fixed it in 10 minutes, no complaints, no Slack rant. I just pushed a hotfix at 3 a.m., wrote visual regression corrected and closed the ticket because I wasn't ready, not yet. Friday morning, all hands meeting. The launch was 1 week out. Trevor strutted into the Zoom room like a man who'd just sold a crypto startup to himself. Luke followed, wearing a Henley shirt and that smug, oops did I disrupt again smirk. I, on the other hand, looked like I hadn't slept because I hadn't. Trevor opened with what he called an exciting update on our relaunch momentum, which was basically just him reading a TechCrunch headline and saying, "We're in that lane now." Then came the main course. Sarah's pitch was solid, Trevor said, and I could already feel the blade getting sharpened. But Luke here, he elevated it, brought a fresh, dynamic vision. Let's give him some recognition. I froze, waiting, hoping he'd stop there. Then Trevor looked directly at me. Sarah, don't you want to thank Luke for saving the pitch? Right there, live, 70 people on Zoom, cameras on, a few execs from Europe watching. HR smiling like it was karaoke night, and me, I nodded, of course. Thank you, Luke. Your insights really transformed the message. I kept my voice level, my smile thin, my eyes dead. Luke winked, actually winked, said, just doing my part for the tribe. In that moment, I could hear my dignity leaving the call, quietly, like it had better places to be. Everyone clapped. I took note of who clapped the longest, who nodded, who smiled like they agreed with the rewrite. It was a mental spreadsheet I didn't want to need, but I made it anyway. They thought this was over, that I'd accepted my new role as background noise in Luke's hero origin story. I'd already started digging, already checked the access logs, the deploy credentials, and something didn't add up. The only way Luke's changes made it through was if someone manually elevated his access, and that wasn't supposed to be possible without the legal signatory's clearance. But the logs showed no elevation, no approvals, just a single deployment, unauthorized, at 1:14 a.m., Wednesday night, which meant one of two things. Either the system was broken or someone forged the key. And I was going to find out which. It was around 2:17 a.m. when I cracked the lid of my laptop for the third time that night, half hoping I was wrong, that I was being dramatic, that maybe Luke had somehow gotten help from one of the interns or someone with rusty permissions lying around from the last reorg. But no, there it was, plain as a slap, a deployment log with his name on it, his branch, his fingerprint, pushed directly into prod like it was a Google Doc. The commit hash was burned into my memory the second I saw it. D9E4F3A dashboard branding fix. Fix my ass. It was a cosmetic reskin that broke 3 accessibility rules and crashed 2 of our oldest client dashboards. More than that, it bypassed every review gate I'd built into the pipeline. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling fan, blades slicing through the dark like dull knives. I remembered building that wall, the whole deployment wall. After we lost a 5-figure client, because some junior dev accidentally deleted a login table from staging, and it trickled into prod. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights hard-coding a policy-driven pipeline. Every commit had to be code-reviewed, signed off by QA, then passed through a final compliance flag that could only be cleared by the signatory listed in the approval matrix. And that signatory, that had been legal's decision. After months of infrastructure chaos, they designated one name, mine, because I was the only one who understood the system and didn't flinch at paperwork. So how the hell did Luke's changes clear my protocols? I cracked open the terminal and ran the audit script I kept tucked away like a flask in a drawer, quiet, discreet, designed to spit out the truth. I pulled the auth logs for that night and filtered for access tokens. That's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The push didn't just go through. It was greenlit using my override key, a master credential I hadn't touched in over 3 months. One I kept offline, air-gapped, printed on literal paper and locked in a drawer behind two-factor access, biometric scan, and a post-it note that said, "Not today, Satan." But the logs didn't lie. It was my key. Only one thing could explain it. Someone had cloned it, or worse, someone had changed the rules. That's when my suspicion congealed into purpose. I went to the printer, the one that jammed on anything heavier than recycled sadness, but still worked if you coaxed it. I printed the full logs, all 143 pages. Change history, elevation timestamps, auth tokens. I slid the stack into a plain black folder and put it in my tote bag like it was a bomb, which functionally it was. Nobody knew I had it. Nobody knew I was looking. Because here's the thing about betrayal. It's not the knife that gets you. It's who hands it to the guy standing behind you. By noon the next day, Luke was giving a project momentum update at the daily stand-up, using phrases like cross-functional bleed-through and branding-first logic. I smiled, took notes, nodded along like the world's most supportive mushroom. Meanwhile, I was already running a background check on every system token used in the last 30 days. Quietly, over lunch, I pinged one of the few engineers I trusted, Maya, backend, ex-Air Force, allergic to bullshit. Asked her if she'd seen anything weird in the deployment flow lately. Like what? She asked. A ghost key, I said. She blinked. I thought they killed that legacy protocol. They did, I said, or they said they did. We agreed to meet after hours, but the deeper I dug, the more tangled it got. I found a change to the access control config from 6 weeks ago. Just a line, tiny, almost invisible. But it redefined the signatory flag to pull from a dynamic variable instead of the static key I had hard-coded, which meant someone rewired the system. Legal either didn't notice or helped. I cross-referenced the change history. It was signed off by someone in legal. The metadata said JB, initials for one of the junior paralegals, Jess Bell, harmless, sweet Jess, who once asked me if you could catch a virus from the firewall. But the signature wasn't recent. It was dated 3 months back, right after we finalized the new compliance controls. The timing was too perfect. Someone had anticipated my guardrails and built a backdoor while I was still reinforcing the front. I printed that config change too, highlighted it in red. Then I opened my compliance folder, the one labeled in case of bullshit. I started a new section. Whatever this was, it wasn't an accident. It was a system-level betrayal, and now I was going to play it like chess. Quiet, slow, and 3 moves ahead. It's a strange feeling, realizing someone used your skeleton key to break into the house you built. Not just any key, the override credential. The nuclear option. A line of code so privileged it might as well have been written in blood. And someone wearing cologne and linked in endorsements, had slipped it in like a party trick and pushed garbage code into production. The problem was, that key didn't work on its own. That override hadn't been active since February. Deactivated it myself, hard-coded it as dormant, and added an extra layer, a check for the signatory list. If someone tried to use the override, the system would call an approval flag tied to one name, mine. And the only way around that was to go into the signatory list and change it, which meant someone had gone into legal's territory. And legal, that wasn't an engineering playground. That was fortress territory. Every change there had to be reviewed, signed, and notarized. You couldn't even sneeze in the permissions tree without tripping an audit log. So how did Luke, or whoever helped him, get past it? I cracked open our admin console and dug into the access logs for the deploy approvals JSON file. Obscure, boring, hidden behind 5 menus and a seriously, don't touch this tooltip. And there it was. An edit timestamped 3 months ago. Changed by J. Bell Legal. I blinked. Jess Bell, junior paralegal. Sweet, scatterbrained, sticker on the laptop, Jess. It didn't make sense. Jess once asked if AWS was a dating app. She didn't know what a signatory protocol was, let alone how to edit one. So I did something I hadn't done in a while. I reached out for coffee. We met at the building cafe that smelled like regret and hazelnut syrup. Jess arrived with an oat milk latte, half a bagel, and the air of someone who thought this was a casual catch-up. I kept it light. Remember back in February, when we were doing all that compliance cleanup? I stirred my tea, watching her blink in slow confusion. Did someone ask you to sign off on a change to the signatory list? She thought for a second. Oh, yeah, I remember something like that. There was a form. Luke brought it down with one of the finance guys. What's his name? Dylan. Said it was just a permissions update for redundancy. My fingers clenched around the cup. You signed it? Yeah, I think so. It was formatted like a normal compliance update. Honestly, I was just trying to clear my queue before lunch. Why? I smiled, just tying up loose ends. Thanks, she left with a wave. I stayed seated, staring into the dregs of my tea like it was going to whisper a way out of this mess. Luke had planned this, or someone had. They'd used Jess as a pawn, slipped a fake compliance update under her nose, got her signature, altered the signatory list so his deploy could sneak through the fence I'd built. It was sloppy, but it worked. Until now. Because what Luke or Trevor, or whichever smug exec had their fingerprints on this, didn't know was that I'd left behind a little gift when I built the pipeline. I'd called it Canary Flag. Buried deep in the deployment flow, hidden behind boring file names and obscure config trees, was a compliance trap. If anyone edited the signatory list without a second signature from me, if someone snuck in a backdoor, I'd get pinged. Not with an alert, that'd be too obvious. No, this was quieter, smarter. It wrote a log, encrypted, tucked away in a private repository labeled /legacy archive /2019 Q4. And when I pulled it up, there it was. Flag triggered, unauthorized signatory change date. February 13, 2:17 p.m. User JBell Legal signed session. Proxy via finance admin. That last part made my skin crawl. Finance admin. Dylan, Trevor's little numbers guy, always hovering, always carrying folders and whispering, I'll handle it. He didn't know code, but he knew just enough to get someone else to open the door, so I added his name to the folder. Started a new section. Luke, Trevor, Dylan, Jess, unwittingly, and now me, watching. I didn't rage. Not yet. Rage burns too fast. What I felt was something colder, denser, like wet concrete hardening around my spine. I went back to my terminal and duplicated every Canary Flag log I could find, printed the last 6 months of deployment approvals, highlighted every deviation, built a folder thick enough to kill a mid-sized animal. This wasn't just a backstab. This was a slow con, and the only thing they'd underestimated more than my system was me. By Monday, Luke was floating through the office like a golden retriever who'd learned how to hold a PowerPoint clicker, high-fiving engineers who didn't like him, smiling wide for hallway selfies with the social team like we were launching a rocket, not a barely patched Frankenstein product, held together with undocumented API calls and 2-decade-old Postgres tables. He was telling anyone who'd listen that he'd turned the ship around and led a transformational push. Hell, I heard him pitch that line to a journalist on a press preview Zoom while I was literally in the background, off camera, fixing a schema migration his branding update had broken. And legal? Clueless. Jess had no idea her signature was used to smuggle in a signatory override. The GC hadn't been looped in. Compliance was busy prepping new slides for investor relations, charts full of made-up KPIs like emotional engagement momentum and user glow-ups per session. Meanwhile, I was scraping log files like an archaeologist trying to piece together a buried civilization that Luke had wandered into and pissed all over. I didn't talk. I didn't warn. I moved. I logged into the change control ledger, the internal system nobody checks unless something catches fire. The ledger was designed for transparency. Every deployment, every rollback, every emergency patch, signed, time-stamped, documented. Most people forgot it existed. I didn't. And there I added a single-line entry under February 14, 2:31 a.m. Deployment anomaly noted. Authenticated via outdated override credentials. Review pending, SM. No drama, no alarm bells, just a note, like a pebble placed on a railroad track. Then I printed a copy, initialed it in blue ink, slipped it into the black folder I now carried with me like a purse made of dynamite. That afternoon, marketing started sending out the investor preview deck. Bright colors, phrases like next-gen journey layer, and seamless touchpoint intimacy. Luke had a quote on slide 3. Trevor's face was on the last slide, next to a chart shaped like a hockey stick. Buried in the email thread, though, was something different. A calendar invite. Subject, final walkthrough founder review. Attendees, Trevor, Luke, 2 senior engineers, 1 person from compliance, and me. I stared at it for a long minute, then clicked accept. Noted the time, Thursday, 11 a.m. That gave me 3 days. 3 days to decide just how far I was willing to push, how clean I wanted this to be. Because let's be honest, revenge is rarely tidy. It's sticky. It drips. You either go in knowing that, or you end up covered in it, trying to scrub your hands with apologies. So I went quiet, quieter than usual, ate lunch at my desk, smiled when Luke said vision alignment like it meant something, listened when Trevor bragged about stewarding the relaunch narrative, tracked Dylan's Slack messages about streamlining shadow costs like he was reinventing accounting with buzzwords he stole from Medium posts. But every night I printed logs, access reports, canary flags, pull request diffs, added them to the folder. I added a sticky note to the inside cover, trust the process, and burn the liars. Wednesday afternoon, Luke staged a mini-launch party for the social team. Cupcakes, ring lights, a launch the core hashtag on a whiteboard with hearts drawn around his name. I watched from the mezzanine level while I fixed another back-end conflict his code had caused by hard-coding a date format in a dynamic environment. At one point, he looked up and waved. I waved back. Thursday morning came fast, too fast. I barely slept. Reread every line in the folder twice. I packed it like it was a parachute I might have to pull mid-fall. At 10:43 a.m., I walked past Luke and Trevor deep in conversation. Trevor was saying something about optionality in compliance disclosures. Luke was nodding like a bobblehead made of Vaseline and hubris. They didn't notice me walk in, didn't see the folder, didn't realize I was the last person on Earth they should have handed a broken protocol to. But they would. By 11 o'clock, I was sitting across from the founder, and the countdown had begun. The founder's voice crackled through the call like an old vinyl that hadn't been played in years, warm, reverent, and just a little detached, like he couldn't quite believe he still had to deal with this nonsense. He started with the usual preamble. We're on the cusp of something big. This product represents a pivot. I'm proud of the work this team has done. I sat still, camera on, lips pressed in a line. I kept my window in gallery view, watching the little Hollywood squares of executive faces nod along in unison. Trevor had that fake grateful expression nailed, palms together like he was praying over a startup shrine. Luke, of course, looked like he'd already picked out a second yacht. We'll start with the product walkthrough, the founder said, and a quick pass through the deployment architecture and change control review. Sarah, I know you'll bring us home on the tech side. Happy to, I said, and meant it in the same way a rattlesnake is happy to unhinge its jaw. Trevor took the floor first, walking through strategic recalibrations. Basically, words wrapped around other words. Nothing concrete, just enough PowerPoint scaffolding to pretend we'd thought things through. Then came Luke, taking the wheel like he'd just walked off a tech stage. He talked for 8 minutes. 8 minutes of buzzwords stacked like IKEA furniture, all wobble and no spine. Brand integrity, emotional throughput, cross-market recontextualization. He described the product relaunch as a canvas of co-creation, and I watched our lead back-end engineer slowly mute his mic and bury his head in his hands. Came the slide titled, Technical Stabilization Courtesy of Luke R. I didn't flinch. Luke smiled into the camera. It wasn't easy, but I knew we needed a bold move, so I dove into the stack. I worked closely with engineering to push a final design patch that really cleaned things up. Trevor chuckled like a sitcom dad. He saved the day, honestly. The founder's expression didn't change. He just nodded once and said, Sarah, you're next. I smiled, of course. First, Luke, thank you for your enthusiasm. He beamed. I clicked a tab, one movement, smooth. Then I hit forward on an email I'd queued up exactly 32 minutes earlier. It went to the founder, legal, and one senior engineer I trusted like a brother. Subject line, unauthorized commit log 2/14 attached, the diff, the timestamp, the credential trace, the deployment key logs, the flag from Canary, the buried compliance trap I'd planted 6 months ago. Triggered, documented, immutable. I didn't say anything, didn't explain. I just leaned back in my chair, hands folded. Silence spread through the call like ink in water. The founder's eyes scanned his screen. You could see the exact moment the lines registered. His pupils dilated. His hand paused mid-scroll. Then, what is this? Trevor leaned in, confused. What's wrong? Luke blinked. Wait, is that? The founder's voice cut through them like a scalpel. This shows an unauthorized production deployment, using override credentials. At 2:14 a.m., February 14, he looked up. No one spoke. He looked at me. I didn't blink. He turned to Trevor. Who signed off on this? Trevor floundered. It was, well, legal approved the signatory update. Another voice chimed in. One of the board observers, older, cold, who let him access prod. The call fell so silent I could hear the ambient fan noise from someone's laptop. Nobody answered. Not Trevor, not Luke, not legal, because they couldn't. Because they'd all danced around the process, played the optics game, smiled for the press releases, and assumed no one was watching. But I had been, quietly, relentlessly, and now there were no more rocks to hide under. No spin to give, no out, just one folder, one line of code, a room full of people who finally realized they'd put the wrong name on the launch banner. Too late. Legal started scrambling before the call even ended. You could hear the rapid-fire clicking of keys, see the shift in body language, the way every legal and compliance face suddenly lost color like a pulled plug. The founder hadn't said another word since reading the log. Just sat back, arms crossed, at stillness that only comes when someone realizes a multi-million-dollar launch may have just legally flatlined. Then came the voice from legal. Denise, the firm's longtime in-house counsel. Sharp, poised, always 2 lattes ahead of a disaster. "We're verifying the access chain," she said slowly, buying time. "Initial review indicates an override was used, but that's only possible if the signatory credentials were edited." Everyone stared at her. She didn't flinch. Her screen glare gave her away. She was already in the config logs, already looking for name. Another exec muttered, "Could this be a shared credential issue?" I said nothing, just glanced off screen at the black folder lying next to my keyboard, the folder that now felt heavier than any server I'd ever lifted. Denise spoke again, voice flatter now. The signatory list was updated on February 11. Luke's smile, which had hung on like a cockroach through a house fire, finally twitched. "Right, yeah, I think we just made a redundant backup key or something." Denise cut him off. "The updated signatory is Sarah M." She paused. "Sarah Mitchell." The room froze. Trevor coughed. That can't be right. But it was. Because 3 months ago, during the infrastructure overhaul that no one wanted to fund and no one wanted to understand, I had formally submitted a revision to the approval chain. A legally documented, logged, and notarized revision, signed by me, co-signed by the then head of compliance, with proper attachments. I hadn't snuck it in. I hadn't hidden it. I had filed it correctly. The problem was, no one paid attention. They were too busy trying to replace me with prettier org charts and LinkedIn fodder to read the fine print. And in that fine print, it said, "Approval for override credentials and deployment authentication is retained solely by the designated infrastructure lead, defined in Compliance Revision Q1 to 143B. That lead was me, so no, Luke hadn't just gone rogue. He'd committed a digital felony. He'd forged a deployment that should have been technically and legally impossible. And now the founder knew, everyone knew. I didn't raise my voice, didn't gloat. Just adjusted the angle of my camera and let them all sit in it. In the silence, someone whispered, too far from their mic for us to catch the whole thing, but I caught the shape of it. "Do we need to disclose this?" There it was, the panic. Because with launch looming and investors already looped in, an unauthorized production push wasn't just a technical issue, it was a compliance bomb. Especially since the product handled sensitive user data. Especially since Luke's code had touched the analytics layer. Especially since he wasn't even on the approved deployment roster. The founder looked at me again. Said nothing, because he didn't need to. I'd said all I needed with one email. One line, one signature. This wasn't revenge, this was proof. That while they played fast and loose with the optics, someone had kept the real systems honest. Me, and I wasn't done yet. The private meeting came an hour later. A last-minute calendar invite with no subject line, sent directly from the founder's assistant. No Trevor, no Luke, no legal, just the two of us. The kind of desperate silence that makes expensive light fixtures hum louder than normal. The founder was already in the Zoom room when I joined. His camera was off for the first few seconds, and when it finally clicked on, I saw him sitting in what looked like his home study, walnut paneling behind him, sleeves rolled up, wedding ring off. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me, not with anger, not even embarrassment. With fear, I waited. He exhaled through his nose, leaned forward. "Sarah, what you uncovered, what they did," he shook his head jaw tight. "This can't get out. Not to investors, not to regulators. You know what's at stake." I nodded once. "I do." He glanced off screen, probably checking the time or maybe trying to find a word less humiliating than begging. He failed. "I need your help," quietly, off record. "We're willing to compensate you for your time." "Define we," I said. He paused. "The board is aware. Given me discretion." Of course they had. When the wolf gets inside the barn, you don't wait for committee consensus. You hand the shepherd a blank check and hope she's still in the mood to take it. I turned and opened the black folder sitting next to me, laid it on the desk. Let the pages flutter loud enough to be picked up on the mic. He watched it like it might catch fire. I don't want my old title, I said, and I sure as hell don't want Luke's. He raised his eyebrows. What do you want? 3 things. I let that hang, the kind of pause they teach you in hostage negotiation school. First, I said I want retroactive authorship credit for all infrastructure changes made between Q3 and now. In writing, publicly disclosed in the board minutes and in the final product documentation. He blinked, nodded slowly. Done. Second, I want a consulting retainer. 7 figures, payable quarterly. I'll sign on for 6 months, renewable only if I choose. I work remotely. You don't get my evenings, you don't get my weekends, and I don't answer to Trevor or anyone in his greasy little kingdom. His throat worked as he swallowed. Okay, we can make that happen. And third, I leaned in, voice low but sharp. You release me from all NDAs, all of them, retroactively. You don't seal this in arbitration. Don't slap a muzzle on me 6 months from now when someone else starts poking around the logs. If I choose to talk, I talk. His face cracked, just a flicker. That's a lot. No, I said, it's exactly what you owe. I clicked one key and shared my screen, showed him the canary flag log, showed him the internal audit trail, the credential map, the diff, the metadata, the compliance timestamp from the change ledger, folder titled Emergency Disclosure Kit Finstar Capital. He didn't ask what Finstar was. He already knew, the lead investor. I wasn't threatening, I was documenting. He sighed. A sound pulled from somewhere deep in the bones. Okay, I ended the screen share. Okay, he repeated, softer now, it's yours. I nodded, closed the folder, and muted my mic for just long enough to let him sit in it. The silence wasn't awkward, it was surgical. I didn't want revenge, I wanted leverage. And now I had it pressed, laminated, legally enforceable. He cleared his throat again. Sarah, yes, his voice trembled just a little. You're not going to speak to the press, are you? I smiled, not cruelly, just enough to let him know he'd asked the wrong question. I'm not going to lie for you, I said. Then I left the meeting. No goodbye. Just a calendar block marked retainer begins do not contact outside hours. And I finally exhaled. The final investor call looked more like a studio production than a meeting. Polished slides, tailored suits, lighting that probably cost more than my entire Q1 salary. Everyone was dialed in. Finstar Capital, the Euro Partners, that AI fund from Toronto that only invests in things with the word neuro in the name. I was a small box in the bottom row. Camera on, mic off, no title under my name. Just Sarah M. They didn't introduce me, didn't need to. I was the insurance policy they weren't going to mention, unless the plane caught fire midair. The founder took the stage like a man who'd just seen God and gotten a non-disclosure agreement out of him. Calm, composed, back in control, at least on the surface. He walked investors through the relaunch, talked about the resilient back-end architecture, the compliance-hardened deployment flow, and the user trust layer that had apparently materialized from the ether. Every phrase was mine. Every protocol, every safeguard, every patch that had kept the platform upright long enough for these people to throw money at it. It all traced back to lines of code written between midnight and despair, logged in quiet bursts under a username no one bothered to thank. Until now. The final slide bore the new system schema. Bottom right corner, in small but unmistakable text. Platform architecture. Sarah Mitchell. Infrastructure lead Q3 Q1. A few faces on the call flickered. One Finstar exec leaned into his mic and said, glad to see the right name on it. I didn't react, just nodded once like I was listening to elevator music. Behind the curtain, the launch button was clicked. The platform went live. No hiccups. No error messages. No rolled eyes from engineers behind the curtain. Because I had built it to survive them. Not to impress them. Not to flatter their wallets. To survive them. Back in the boardroom, real or virtual, I'll never know, the founder leaned in close to general counsel, voice low but caught on the hot mic before it was muted, who let a non-engineer deploy to prod. And the GC, without missing a beat, replied, they didn't. She just made it look like he did. No panic, no blame, just truth. That's what I'd done. Made it look like Luke had saved the day. Let them build a throne on my foundation of silence and sweat, only to flip the lights on when the press was watching. Let the investors clap for the golden boy, then made them watch him disappear. That afternoon, I walked through the main hallway of the office for the last time, past the neon motivational signs, the espresso machine that never worked, the wall of employee headshots framed like trading cards. Luke's was already gone, just an empty square with 4 pushpins and a thumbprint smudge. Down the hall, Trevor sat at his desk, pale, watching a Slack thread die in real time. I didn't wave. Just walked out, folder under my arm, commit log reprinted and framed. One small caption under the hash, deployment anomaly noted, review pending. I paused in the lobby, looked up at the company's tagline embossed in silver on the wall, innovate with integrity. I smiled, because for the first time in that building's history, someone finally had. Next time, promote someone who knows what a rollback does. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.